Hello and welcome to our webinar, Shake Up Your Shelves, Examining AAPI Representation in Library Collections and Classrooms. I'm Julia Smith, Senior Editor, Books for Youth at Booklist. Before we begin, I'd like to go over some technical details. Links to today's slide presentation, title list, educator guide, and downloadable poster were included in the reminder email you received from Zoom 1 hour ago. To download them, please open that email, scroll to the bottom, and click on the links located there. You can also download the slides and title list by copying the URLs on this screen into your web browser. If you have any trouble accessing these materials, please contact us at webinars@booklistonline.com. The audience is in listen-only mode, but we welcome any questions you may have. On the bottom of your screen is a toolbar with a section for Q&A. If you have a question or need technical assistance, simply click Q&A and type your message into the box that appears. We will do our best to respond to all tech-related questions, and we'll pass along all other questions to today's panelists so they can follow up with you after the webinar. Last but not least, Booklist offers closed captioning on all webinars. To enable or disable captions on your screen, please look for and click the live transcript icon on the toolbar mentioned earlier. From there, you can select Show or Hide Subtitles from the menu that appears. If you choose to enable subtitles, you can adjust the size of the captions at any time by selecting Subtitle Settings. We have a fantastic program for you today. So without further ado, I would like to introduce today's moderator, Linda Sue Park. Linda Sue Park is the author of the Newbery Medal winner, A Single Shard, and the #1 New York Times bestselling novel, A Long Walk to Water, along with many other award-winning and popular novels and picture books. Highly respected as an advocate for diversity, inclusiveness, and reading, she is a former board member of the Society of Children's Books Writers and Illustrators, and currently serves on the advisory board of We Need Diverse Books and Rabbit Hole Children's Literature Museum Project. She is also the creator of Kabuka website, which celebrates authors and illustrators of Korean descent. She lives in Western New York with her family, and in addition to delivering TED Talks, or the TED Talk, Can a Children's Book Change the World? She has traveled to such far-flung destinations as Brazil, Dubai, and the Galapagos to talk about her work. Take it away, Linda Sue.
Thank you, Julia. I've done a lot of these, but I'm kind of shaking with excitement about this one. It's authors that I admire, authors who are my heroes, and we're going to spend the next hour giving you hopefully some practical tips and strategies for looking critically at the books that you're sharing with your students and your library patrons, to share how you can shake up your shelves. I do love the title of this series. It's a great thing to think about shaking up your shelves, retiring books that are offensive or outdated, and adding titles that reflect the experiences of underrepresented groups. So today, of course, we're going to focus on building an inclusive bookshelf representing Asian American and Pacific Islander, which we will refer to as AAPI. Voices that are more than ever now important for teachers and librarians to understand and to add to your shelves and to your curriculum. I want to send a special thanks to Candice Mack, who is the managing librarian for young adult services at the Los Angeles Public Library and past president of both the Asian Pacific American Librarians Association and the Young Adult Library Services Association, YALSA. She created the Educator's Guide that today's session is based on. It was sent to you in advance of the webinar, but is also available in those links for today's session. And please share widely with your colleagues. It's a really great Educator's Guide. Okay, so now I have the pleasure of introducing the authors for today's session. Starting with Joanna Ho. JOANNA is the New York Times best-selling author of the beautiful picture books, Eyes That Kiss in the Corners and Playing at the Border. And she has a forthcoming YA novel called The Ties That Bind Us, her YA debut, which will be out in June. And I mean, if you don't have her picture books, you need them. And the YA is really an exciting debut. So welcome, JOANNA. So, okay, next we have EEK, ERIN ENTRADA Kelly, who is truly one of my heroes. She is the Newbery Award medal winning author of Hello Universe, and also won a Newbery honor for We Dream of Space. She's written many other middle grade novels, and just out is Those Kids from Fawn Creek, which is another absolutely terrific read. So thank you so much, ERIN, for joining us today. And I'm looking forward to chatting with you. Okay, then we have RAJANI LAROCCA, newly minted Newbery author of the honor book Red, White, and Whole, as well as several other titles for young readers. She's also a full-time practicing physician, which makes me tired just to say, so you can see her backdrop. That's where she's coming to you from, taking time out of her, what must be an incredibly busy workday. So welcome, RAJANI. And finally, debut author XIXI Tian. Her debut book is called This Place Is Still Beautiful. It's a YA author. And of course, for marginalized groups, debuts are so exciting. Yes, another one, right? So I am really, really excited for XIXI and to welcome her to this session today. Okay, so we're going to go right into the questions that again come from Candace Mack's Educator Guide. And we're going to just go through some of these and give each of our panelists a chance to talk about it, talk about the particular question, and then we're going to hopefully get into a real conversation, which I am really looking forward to. Okay, so this first question is actually for XIXI. Do the AAPI characters actively participate in the story as main characters, or are they only secondary characters? Are they depicted as heroes and leaders and as having agency and power and the ability to solve problems? So XIXI will of course be referring to her new book, Once Again, This Place Is Still Beautiful.
Thanks, Linda. So I think this is a really great question. My book is not out yet, but for those of you who don't know, it's basically about these two sisters who are Chinese American, they're biracial. One of them is actually white passing and the other is much more resembles her Chinese mother. And their house gets vandalized by a racial slur. Like someone spray paints the word chink on their garage in the beginning of the book. And it's sort of like about the two of them and their ability to figure out how they can participate in their own lives as like main characters in the story. Because I think that like when it comes to experiencing racism sometimes, at least I have felt that way, and that's sort of like why I wrote this particular story, is that sometimes when you experience something like that, you can sort of feel like things are happening to you and you don't have control or agency over your own story. And that's like something that the two sisters really struggle with. And I think that like people can react to that in a lot of different ways. So for instance, I wanted to reflect that there are lots of different ways that you can react to that, and people might not react in the same way. And I think that I don't even react in every situation to the same way, because like I have, there's always been a situation, I'm sure everyone on this panel has experiences like going somewhere and like someone like says ni hao to you, or like says something like totally racist. Like I was standing at a bus stop in college once and some lady walked by me and called me an ugly chink, like completely out of nowhere. And I was like, didn't even know how to react to that. But basically like the older character in the story, she is like very in tune with sort of like topics of racial justice. She's like a little older. She's coming back from her freshman year of college. She's much more like aware of her sort of like own identity. And she is like really, she wants to like take this by the reins and like make, and then like bring justice to whoever like perpetrated this upon her family. And the younger sister has sort of like the opposite reaction, where she's like, why is this such a big deal to you? Like, why can't you just move on? Like, you're making this the center of your own life. And it's actually like more traumatic to me that like I keep having to think about this because you keep talking about it and I don't want to talk about it in this particular situation. And so I think that like this question sort of like goes to that, which is, yes, they are like their main characters, but they're figuring out their own ways of determining what agency means in this situation. And like, I think that like in some ways the answer is like a little bit ambiguous because it just depends on how you process that trauma on your own. But like taking agency isn't always like necessarily one way or the other. So I hope that like my story sort of like reflects some of the nuances around what it means to like really actively participate when you might not want to be part of that particular narrative that is happening to you.
Oh, I love your answers, Cece, because I've always thought that especially literature for young people is the opportunity for a safe way to practice life. And life is hard and we all need a lot of practice. So it sounds like your book is showing young readers, you know, how would you be more like, you know, Annalise or the other character? Would you, you know, who would you know, practicing how they might respond in those similar situations. So thank you for that response. Okay. The next question is for ERIN. Do all of the AAPI characters have the same appearance? Or is it a diversity of skin tones, hair textures, and styles and body type presented? Not all AAPI people are fair-skinned with straight dark hair and eyes, and there are 48 countries in what is generally called Asia. So ERIN, take that one away.
Yes, so this was something that I really wanted to explore, especially in my second book, The Land of Forgotten Girls, because I don't think that people realize that colorism exists in Asian communities. So in the Philippines, especially, well, I don't know about especially, but I'm only speaking about the Philippines that I know of. In the Philippines, you know, the skin lightening creams are big business. You know, not everyone, people commonly want to be fair skinned. And when I go to the Philippines, it's one of the most common things that people will say to me when I'm there. They'll say, oh, look how light your skin is. And it's meant to be a compliment, of course. And I find this so fascinating because I don't think a lot of people realize that exists in Asian communities. And it's rooted, of course, in classism and this concept of, even when I was growing up, I learned that it's better to have fair skin because the darker your skin is, the more it implies the less money you have, right? Or that you have to work outside, and those are all considered negative things. But if you have fair skin, it's equated with money and prestige and beauty and all these different things. So that's something that I really wanted to explore in Land of Forgotten Girls specifically, because the main character in that book, Saul, she mentions that she has dark skin, and she mentions that her sisters have light skin. And the way that she mentions it implies that that's just one way that she's kind of inferior to her sisters. And also the way people treat her or talk about her is different, just by the nature of the fact that her skin is darker in tone. And I don't think that's something that necessarily people know a lot about. I don't know. So that's something that I think is really important, because I think that, you know, people often see the Asian community as a monolith, right? Of course. But there's so many nuances within all the communities, including things like colorism and what it means to be beautiful. And, you know, so it's something that's important for me to think about. And I hope that other people think about and talk about if they're not aware that it exists.
I think one of the huge advantages of being a member of the dominant culture is that when people first meet you or encounter you or whatever, you are not lumped into a group. You are whoever you are, right? But when people from marginalized groups have their first encounters, there's automatically this mentality, and we do it to ourselves also, that we, you know, want to put people into that monolith. right? And it's a really hard way of thinking to undo. But we've grown up with it, and we're having to learn to undo it ourselves. And so things like, yeah, not a monolith. Yeah, the light skin thing. Oh my God, my mom. It's like, oh my God, you're too tan, all my life, right? So it's something that I hope as we explore in books and other media, that the younger generation is going to be cooler about, right? I mean in a good way. Okay. So my next question is for Joanna. Do the AAPI characters abandon some aspect of their culture, language, anything like that in order to achieve happiness or resolution in your stories?
I actually think it's the opposite. I think that for AAPI communities in general who have immigrated here to the United States, the history has often been one of assimilation and of abandoning culture and of trying to fit in. And I'm hopeful, I think in all of our stories really, but I believe that really our power comes as we better understand our own culture and we better understand our history, which really is a journey. I can speak for myself, but I think for so many of us, because we don't learn any of that in school. So much, I think, of my own self-discovery and identity building has come as an adult, as I've learned so much more about my own history, both here in the US, but also my own history, like in China and in Taiwan, and all the layers and nuances that holds. And so I feel like that really comes through in all the stories that I write. So from Eyes That Kiss in the Corners, where a young girl, through her family relationships and an understanding of her own family and culture and history, comes to recognize her own beauty in the face of, ERIN mentioned this, but really like white supremacist beauty standards that have been now perpetuated across the world, to the novel, which is a similar thing where May, the main character, comes to better understand her own personal family history and her own culture and then the history of Asian Americans in the US, and understands that we haven't had a history of silence and of fitting in, really, that there has been a history of speaking out that we never learn about. And so I think it's important in the stories that you put in your libraries and that you're reading in your classrooms. And I think for us as writers to really show that power that we have as a community, even with, particularly actually with all the diversity within our communities, to highlight all of that we're not a monolith and that we really have so many unique and very, very different aspects of culture and history that should be highlighted in many ways.
Yeah, and you touched on something there that I've been thinking a lot about and still have more questions than answers. But, I have my Korean culture, the Korea of my ancestors, where I visited a few times and so forth. But what I really am working on, struggling with, trying to figure out is, what is Korean American culture? Which of course is a whole nother thing. It's the whole immigrant thing. And it's not Korean culture, as certainly my Korean relatives are going to say, oh, you're not very Korean. I'm like, well, I'm trying. Because a Korean American or any kind of Asian American is its own thing. And that's another interesting thing to think about, is that, no, I'm going to struggle against being ashamed of being Korean American. What is Korean enough? I'm not. I'm Korean American. So this is another thing that a lot of our books explore, because we are all from immigrant families, and that has been our experience. Okay, Rajani, what messages about AAPI folks does your book, or books that you know of from our community, send to non-AAPI readers? Great question, and just the right person to answer it.
So thank you, Linda Sue. It's really interesting what you were just talking about, being Korean enough or being American enough, and realizing that you're Korean American and that is something separate. So that's what my main character Reha kind of struggles with a lot in Red, White, and Whole. She's kind of feels like she's torn between those two extremes, right? Am I Indian? Not really. Am I American? Well, not really. That's kind of how she feels sometimes. And she has to come to terms with being Indian American and what that means to her. And honestly, I talk to kids, when I talk to kids about this book, I talk to plenty of kids who are not Indian American, as well as some who are. And I talked to them about how, have you ever felt this way? Have you ever felt like you belong in these different worlds, or maybe you belong in neither of these worlds? And everyone raises their hand. Isn't that interesting? And, you know, just because it's not about the particular issue that Reha struggles with about being Indian American doesn't mean that we don't all feel this way at times. So I think that through Reha's story and her specific struggle, they realize that we all go through these kinds of struggles and that none of us is just one thing. But for the Indian American, the South Asian American kids in the groups, I hope that they see in this story that they also can be the heroes of their own story, that they can have their own adventures, they can come to terms with and struggle with their own issues, but that ultimately they do belong. And that would have been such an important message to me growing up when I had these feelings. You know, in Red, White, and Whole, for the most part, most of the struggles are internal, right? There's not necessarily, it's not that Reha is necessarily responding to other people telling her that she doesn't belong. She wonders about it herself. And that's really hard. And so in many ways, the whole story is about her coming to the realization that she does belong and that she helps create the world in which we all belong.
I really like this question because I hope that by now, I'm sure everybody in the audience, I know the whole panel, understands the importance of the mirror representation, Dr. Bishop's mirrors, windows, sliding glass doors. And I think that I hope we can take for granted by now that representation is important, that kids seeing themselves reflected in books is very, very important for them. And so I want to sort of move on and start putting more emphasis on the fact that dominant culture readers need these books maybe even more because of the power imbalance and the power structure in our society, you know, and the way history is taught, or rather not taught in our schools, that that dominant culture kids need these books as much or perhaps more than kids from the same groups, right? I have long remembered a wonderful librarian early in my career who said, oh, I'm so grateful for Seesaw Girl because I have this darling Asian girl in my class and I haven't been able to give her anything where she can see herself. And so, you know, I'm so excited to give her this book. And even back then, more than 20 years ago, way before we needed diverse books, I was thinking to myself, and are you also giving it to all the white kids and the Black kids and the whatever else kids in your class? Right? Because I wrote it for that little girl, of course, but I didn't write it just for her, right? Okay, so I want to pause just for a second to talk about shaking up your shelves and what I'm hearing from these panelists, which is their emphasis on character and story, which is what any good book does, right? It may be that people start with a big idea, you know, racism or identity or whatever. But in order to make a good story, you concentrate on the character and their struggles, right? And this is what all of these writers do. So this is the kind of book that you need on your shelves. And a group of scholars, including Dr. Sarah Park Dahlin, are asking people to examine their shelves using the 5 Fs. Okay, now this isn't on a slide because I wasn't together enough to to figure that out, but they are food, festivals, folklore, famous people, and fashion. Okay, one more time: food, festivals, folklore, famous people, and fashion. And they are the tip of the identity iceberg. Okay, they are how people think of, oh, Asian culture. Okay, and what these writers are doing is the huge bottom of the iceberg. They're examining nuance and diversity within diversity and character, family and ancestry and so forth. So if your shelves for marginalized groups are mostly limited to those 5 Fs, okay, you do need to shake up your shelves and you need to get some of these stories in that concentrate on the humanity of the characters represented, and not just let's celebrate Chinese New Year. Okay, so so that's one way to think about, I think, shaking up your shelves. Okay, so This next question is going to be a tough one, and I think will lead to an extended conversation. And all of our panelists have already touched on it in some way. So how do you as creators address racist events or incidents? Is racism acknowledged in a meaningful way? Do characters of different races work thoughtfully toward cultural understanding? You know, how do you deal with racism in your books? And I struggle with this because I want to present these things realistically and yet also hopefully. And sometimes if I tip too far towards the hopeful, it's all like, oh, everybody gets it now, and we're all one big happy, you know, non-racist family, and that's just not the world. So, you know, especially in books for young people, how do we balance realism with hope, especially in terms of racism? So I don't know how you, actually didn't plan this one out. Does somebody want to start?
I can jump in really quick, Linda Sue.
Thank you.
So in my first book, Blackbird Fly, the main character, Apple, is the only Asian in her school. She's Filipino. And she deals with the boys at her school have created this list called the Dog Log, which is a list of the ugliest girls in school. And she finds out she's on the list, and it kind of triggers a series of, you know, bullying, obviously, and a lot of racism thrown her way. And when I was writing it, I was thinking, you know, obviously it centers Apple. She's the main character. It's told in her voice. But one of the things I was thinking about too is the other kids who bully her and call her names and bark at her in the hallways and talk about how her family eats dog and all these different things that happen to her. One of the things I struggled with was, how am I going to deal with them? But then I decided, because I did get feedback from some readers early on who said, well, I don't like that the bullies, you know, they didn't get their big comeuppance. Like the teacher didn't intervene. They didn't get kicked out of school. They didn't get like any big thing happening to them. And I thought a lot about that, because in my mind, the story is about Apple learning to accept herself and love herself, despite these terrible things being said to and about her. And in my view, kind of like what you were saying, Linda Sue, about writing realistically, the sad truth of the matter is that very often those people don't get their big comeuppance. You know, the teacher doesn't intervene. They're smart enough not to do these things when teachers are watching. So I struggled with, is it okay that these bullies, these perpetrators, these racists don't have a big moment where they're like, oh, I'm a real jerk, I should really change my ways, you know? Or is it more important to focus on Apple and how she learns to love and accept herself despite being treated this way? Because to me, that felt like the more honest story. But then I question, am I doing a disservice in some way by not addressing the other side of the other piece of the puzzle? I don't know if the other panelists have thought about that or have struggled with that as well.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting and what's challenging is that we're, you know, writing about young people, you know, for young people, and young people can't solve some of these problems. Even grown-ups can't solve most of these problems, right? They're huge problems. So I thought about that as well. One of the things that happens in Red, White, and Whole is kind of an overt racism, where a fast food employee says to Reha, "Do you speak English?" and like shouts it in her face like she couldn't comprehend it otherwise. And this actually happened to me when I was a teen, and I, much like Reha, I didn't know what to say. I was just kind of like, like what are you talking about? And but in the book, I had her friend say the thing I wish I had said, which was, "She speaks English better than you do." And then they walk away and they go do something else. But the other thing that I wanted to kind of consider in Red, White, and Whole was a kind of racism where it's not as clear that the person intended to be hurtful. Like, in fact, they probably did not intend to be hurtful, but they were hurtful anyway. And that's a classmate of Reha's who says, "Do you speak Indian?" And this is just, you know, like a question like, oh, you know, like you're good in French class. Like, do you speak Indian too? And, you know, Reha has like all these thoughts, like, first of all, like, what do you mean Indian? Like, there are so many languages in India. And then she goes down this whole thought process of how like the diversity within India itself and how people don't really understand that, and how like there are all these different languages and she doesn't read or write any of them, right? And she starts to feel like, oh my goodness, like I don't. And so at the end of it, she can't express all of these thoughts and she just says no. And she just leaves it at that. And so she can't solve that problem either, but I think that I'm hoping by the end of the book, the readers will think maybe the next time she's asked something like that, she'll have more ability to express more of what she thinks. And that's where Reha is moving the needle in her growth. But yeah, it's hard because we can't solve racism. All we can do is kind of figure out how to deal with it and have a strategy for the next time.
Yeah, I'd love to jump into this question as well, just because my book is like obviously like has like a very overtly racist act in it that is sort of like the inciting incident and sort of like what the book is like about. But I think that I really struggled with this and in writing it, because I think that like one of the things that's difficult about when you experience something like this is like the aftermath piece. Is like when you're writing a story, you love to have like this beautiful arc where this happens and then it's like you learn from it and it's like resolved. And one of the things I really wanted to emphasize in the story and wanted to explore really is the fact that when something like this happens to you, it doesn't ever get resolved. What the previous panelists said as well, like when these things happen, like these things have happened to me, and I often don't come up with the right answer in the right moment. And I will think about it like over and over and over again, like after it's over, to be like, how could I have reacted to this in a different way? Like, look at all these like 100 snappy comebacks that I would have had I thought of in the moment when someone said something to me, but like I didn't get there and now I feel really bad about it. And I think like part of the thing in my book is called This Place Is Still Beautiful, because it's about like the characters coming to terms with the fact that they grew up in a place that they were like really generally had a pretty happy childhood. It sort of like reflects my childhood. But then like when something racist happens, sort of like colors your experience of your home. And how do you like square with that? Because it's and how do you come back to a place where you don't let the ugly thing that happened like destroy everything that you loved about a particular place? And it's like I think it's very challenging. And you know, I think that like part of the issue with the perpetrators who are perpetrating the racist act is like they do the thing and then they move on and they probably never think about it again. But with you as the victim, like you're often thinking about it like long in the aftermath, and it colors like a lot of your perspective. Like it colors the character's perspective of their summer. It colors the character's perspective of their whole like coming of age at that particular time. And I think it was really important in the story to indicate that like there is no like real like moment of like eureka moment where you just like resolve it and you're like you've moved on and you've like gained this like higher understanding. It's usually not that simple. And I think that like particularly for the audience that I was writing for, which is older, which is teens, they can understand that there is a lot of that level of nuance, and the fact that it is a very complicated situation. So it's very hard to strike that balance, I think, because I do really feel like at the end of the story you want to feel that there is that like closure, but sometimes like you personally don't get that closure. So
I'll jump into my stories are also all very directly, sometimes overtly addressing racism as well. So I'll start with just two examples. So one is Eyes That Speak to the Stars. His friend draws a picture of their friend group and his eyes are drawn like slits on his face. And I think that goes to what ERIN and Rajani and Cece have all been talking about, which is sometimes it's not, it's a microaggression. It's not intentional. It's even his friend. And I was thinking about this after ERIN was talking. I didn't address that at all, like the person who did the racist thing, because I feel like so much of what we're saying is so much of this story and just self-discovery is about how we can define our own resolution and our own healing in this complex space where there is no actual I mean, hopefully one day in a dream world, there really is no systemic racism. But until we get there, I think us as AAPI or as marginalized people have to define our own healing and our own ways of how we want to respond to be empowered in that way. And in the silence that binds us, something, you know, her brother, May's brother, dies by suicide. And then a very wealthy white businessman, basically in the very public way, accuses the Asian community and her parents specifically of increasing the pressure and causing the stress in their community that drove, you know, their own son to his death. And I think that one thing in terms of how we address racism is that we, even as Asian Americans, we don't deal with racism in a vacuum. It's not like whites and Asians, you know, there are so many other people who deal with racism, so many other groups, and we are in all of these interracial relationships that have such complex history that we have not been defined yet. You know, the stories have been narrated and told by one very distinct and very biased voice. And I think, so in this story, May's best friend is Haitian, and May also has to come to terms with like the anti-Blackness in the Asian community and her own complicity in that, and her own understanding of racism, and recognizing that she has not, up until this experience, been as aware or as conscious as her friend has had to be. And so I think that that's part of the exploration, and where I hope to continue to see stories go is just, and more on our shelves, is less about like racism 101 and more about how we explore this complexity of interracial relationships, how we can truly work in solidarity when the narratives of white supremacy are setting various marginalized groups against each other, when we could be exploring and defining things together.
And I want to jump in really quickly, if you don't mind, Linda Sue, because I want to say one more thing, because this is Rajani mentioned basically microaggressions, and I want to think about. Well, I'll tell you a really quick story. When I won the Newbery for Hello Universe, I gave a speech, and I talked about how, you know, lonely I felt growing up in the South, and how people would constantly ask, "What are you? What are you?" And I never even answer it, and it was horrible. And afterwards, you know, everyone comes through the line and shakes your hand. And this white librarian leaned toward me and she said, "I have to tell you, I don't even think you look Asian. You just look normal to me." And I had just given this speech about, you know, all this stuff. Okay, we can unpack that for hours if we wanted to. I didn't know what to say. I'm just kind of like, I think she meant it as a compliment. It was very jarring. And the reason I mention that is because I think, like Rajani said, people say things, they don't realize what they're saying, they don't intend harm, but they still do harm. And I think it's really, really important that all of us, including us on the panel and everyone here, like the 400 people here, obviously you're here because you care about the topic. So you're probably thinking, I am a very open-minded, you know, embracing cultures person, and you are. But also, I think it's important that we all also do a lot of self-examining, because every single one of us has stereotypes, and every single one of us has thoughts that we have about other groups and other people. And we can't just assume that we're great people and that we're so open-minded and like congratulate ourselves, right, for being woke. I think it's really important that we also examine not just the microaggressions that other people do, but even the thoughts that we have, and just take time to ask ourselves, why did I think that? Why did I say that? You know, I would hope that that woman, who probably thinks she's very open-minded and thought she was giving me some great compliment, you know, it'd be nice if she did some of that soul searching, you know what I mean? I think we forget that part of it often.
I have just so many things I want to say. I knew this would happen. We need 6 hours for this, but okay, a couple of things for both dealing with racism and for allyship or accomplishship, which is what it's sometimes called these days. There are many sites on the internet that will give you actual language, okay? And I think that this is the hard thing. I mean, a couple of people have spoken about, I didn't know what to say. I was just so shocked. I didn't, you know, so actually having the language and rehearsing, you know, with someone else, right? It can put your brain in a place where you're a little bit quicker. So for example, an ally might say, hearing something like that, might say, I'm not comfortable with what you just said. You know, do you want to talk about it a little more? Or could you explain why you think that? So there are phrases that you can use and you can have pushed more towards the front of your mind, right? So that you can be ready. And that's both for responding to racism yourself and for allies who are in the room, right? So there are a number of places. I'm going to blank now on what they are, but if you look up, you know, response to racism or allyship or things like that, you will find lists of these phrases, and they can be really helpful, as can rehearsing them, right? Okay, so you know, this whole business about that we can't solve racism as individuals, but enough individuals makes a system, you know. So whenever you do some thinking about this, especially the people in this room who, as Erin just said, are here because you care, okay? When you come up against something, whatever it is in this vein, you need to practice that the response is not, oh, I'm not racist, but rather, how can I do better? Okay, we can all do better, right? I have tons of work to do, especially because I'm old. I'm older than the rest of these guys. My brain is slower. I'm more set in my ways. I have so much work to do. So every single day, every confrontation, every opportunity is, how can I do better? What is my automatic response here? And then a pause, and is there a better one? Can I find a better one in the way that I'm responding to this? So, you know, if you can sort of expunge "I'm not racist" from your vocabulary, because we all are to some extent, and instead say, you know, how can I do better? Okay, related to this question that we've just talked about, we had a question that I've been thinking about lately, which of course all of us have, which is this terrible book banning thing that's going on, right? And in my lifetime as an author of books for young children, it feels different to me, this current wave. I have not before seen librarians and teachers afraid of losing their jobs. I mean, it might be unpleasant for them at work, but that they are actually either losing their jobs or under threat of losing their jobs, that sounds scary to me. And I know that people want solutions or want strategies at least. And as an author, I don't have a whole lot to offer. I'm not a school administrator or a school board member, but I'm going to start with Joanna, who is, and if you don't know, she's also vice principal at a high school. I have heard of one successful strategy from Round Rock, Texas. Again, a high school principal who, and the important thing to remember here, I think, is there are actually more of us. Right? There are more of us who want the books on the shelves, who believes that young people should have the right to choose, who don't want books taken off the shelves, right? Who want parents to be in charge of, or at least aware of, their children's reading for the most part, exceptions always. But the other side is louder. Okay, we have to get louder somehow. But I'll go ahead and ask Joanna to take that question on.
Yeah, this is a super hard question. I feel like it's one of those we do what we can where we're planted situations, and we need to organize and get loud in the same way that the opposition, if you will, is organized, you know, and intentional. So from the like, do what you can where you're planted, I'm the vice principal of a small high school in the Bay Area. And hopefully know I have a lot of passion about books and reading. And so I know for me, some things are, I mean, I have some power here because I'm the vice principal, so I'm an administrator, but we started a universal reading program at our school. My school is entirely students of color, predominantly Latinx, Black, and Pacific Islander. And so we started a universal reading program where everybody stops what they're doing for 20 minutes a day and they read. And as a result, we have brought in the local library brought in tons of books by people on this panel actually, and gave them away for free. And every student in our school got a free book. I went to our library. We have a library space that was filled with just all old donated books from local other libraries. So very problematic, very, very old, predominantly written by white men. And I literally just trashed probably more than half the books in our library, and I have solicited donations. I order a lot of books off firstbook.org. So if you're not aware of First Book, you can order really, really cheap books that are brand new, and they're very intentional about stocking their own inventory with inclusive literature. So I've been slowly all year filling our library with these inclusive books. And I think that that's what I can do in the space that I'm in. And so I feel like the question is very much like what Linda Sue asked, is like, what can I learn and what can I do? Like, what power do you have in your own spheres to impact that change? For me, it's this one 360 person school. And then in this role, and then as an author, it's hopefully putting out stories and writing stories that have some kind of truth that will shift the narrative and allow people to like come into their own power so that they can then also do the work. But yeah, that's like my experience. But I really appreciate what Linda said, which is that I feel like those of us who believe and know the power of inclusive, truthful literature have to organize in the same way and speak up, not only through our books and the things we put on ourselves, but publicly at school board meetings, because it's empowering to know that we're not fighting the good fight alone.
Yes, and one thing that also occurred to me after listening to you all answer the last question was, I am like staggered by the response that we're removing books from the shelves because they make so many of our students uncomfortable. You know, to learn the truth of history about what white supremacy has meant to this country, and it makes them feel sad or it makes them feel bad. And no, I don't see anything for the fact that erasure and stereotyping has made so many marginalized children feel terrible, as you've just heard, for decades. And so in effect, what these people are saying is, my children are more important than your children. And we all feel that individually, of course, I'll admit that. I have the most wonderful children in the world, you know, and the grandchildren are even better. But but no, that do you think that all children are important? You know, do you really think that? And so, you know, why we need all these books on the shelves. I would like to see, I'm very pleased to see that ALA has been marshaling resources and strength. I would love to see the publishers get in there somehow. Some of them are doing things sort of behind the scenes, but they have skin in the game, right? I mean, so I'm not sure what kind of concerted effort they can make, but yes, I do think making noise and letting these legislators, school boards and so forth know that no, there's actually more people who want these books on the shelves than not. So the Round Rock, Texas administrator has put all her stuff online. She says, take it, use it, you know, maybe it will work for you too. So does anybody else want to jump in on that one? Okay, so we're going to move on to another one that I added kind of late in the game, and it's selfishly because it's something I struggle with so much. So I want to hear what these other authors do in their own work, which is that how do you deal with the difficulty that occurs when your own lived experience and what you're writing about overlaps with stereotype? Okay, so there's been some discussion of this generally because of the movie Turning Red, right? But here's a very simple example that I give, which is that my beautiful parents speak with very heavy Asian accents, the kind of accents that have been parodied and used viciously, racistly for generations, right? I am so full of admiration that they speak English. I mean, that's always the retort. You want to say, well, how good is your Korean, you know, but they always have the counter to that. Well, they're living here, you know. All right, so their English to me is amazing that, you know, that they've been able to as adults, not as children, learn this language, which is so different in just all kinds of aspects than their Korean language. And I want to pay homage to that. I want to be honest about their use of English. And yet, if I write it as they speak it, I'm in danger of perpetuating a stereotype, right? okay, what do I do? What do I do with that? And there's all sorts of examples. Another prevalent one is the tiger parent, you know, that, and of course, Joanna's YA deals with that, you know, and what do we do when our own lived experience, you know, how do we depict that within the danger of perpetuating a stereotype? Help me out. Give me some pointers. I think Rajani, you wanted to address this?
Yeah, I mean, I think, so this is so challenging, right? But I think that when things come from your own lived experience, you can express nuance in what is portrayed. And the background to all of it is love and respect. And I think that comes through, that there is a way, I mean, so every child is ashamed of their parent at one point or another, right? Whether we admit it or not, we are. And I think that the ways to kind of depict these things that can be stereotyped is to have your character think of it in the way that we think of it, right? Which is, I love these people. I acknowledge that they don't speak with the accent that I speak with. And sometimes that's embarrassing for me, or sometimes it's embarrassing for them. And sometimes it's just embarrassing for the people who are like mocking them for, you know, like pretending that they can't understand them when they definitely can. But that it is in this setting of, I love and respect these people. And this is just, you know, this is part of who they are. You know, the other thing that, you know, I think there's a phrase in Red, White, and Whole where it's like, you know, Indians, you know, rarely agree with one another. Like you put like 3 people in a room, they're all like gonna have 3 different opinions. And, you know, that's the truth. It doesn't mean that like we're argumentative people. It just means that like people, there's so much diversity within that community that it's likely that they're not going to agree, right? They all speak different languages. They come at it from slightly different angles. That's okay. And I think that if you put it in that setting of love and respect first as the background to everything, you can express these things that are so true and oftentimes really funny sometimes, so that you know, and that's okay. And we can laugh about it knowing that it's because it's surrounded by love and respect.
That's great. Yes, I think that's one place where your intent, you have to make it clear, but that intent does matter. I think Cece wanted to address this too.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything that was said. And I also think that like when you're portraying your own lived in experience, stereotypes tend to be flat, right? Like, let's just like take the tiger mom experience, the stereotype as an example. You know, people know what I mean when I say tiger mom, and it's supposed to be, and it's like sort of like a very one-dimensional portrayal of like, you know, a mean Asian mom who just like drives you to like a really bad place and she just wants you to like go to Harvard or whatever. And my mom was very much like that as well. Like she really was like high achieving. Like I was scared when I took home like A- report cards, I would like hide them, you know? But I think that when you're writing from your own experience, you can expound upon why the mother is that way. Like, you know, she's not trying to do these things for no reason whatsoever. And like exploring the motives and like what she's really like behind the scenes and making her like a 3-dimensional character, such that she is actually comes off as a real person and not as like quote unquote a stereotype. Because you know, like stereotypes, they really only like address like one facet of like one of a person's like personality or identity or whatever. And I think that when you are writing about that yourself, you're able to make it less of a stereotype by adding that context and nuance.
Can I just add something to that? So I also want to say that part of what we can do is not change our characters or make them act according to kind of Western values. So many times I feel like, you know, AAPI characters, it's like, well, they're in this family and the parents have these rules and like, they're not allowed to break. When is this teenager going to say, no, I reject you. This is not who I am. That's not the story that I'm going to write, because that's not the experience that I have, that, you know, that you have to reject where your parents come from in order to be, to have agency and be the hero of your own story.
Okay,
So
I'll write that story. Yeah, diversity within diversity. So yeah, that's were you finished, Rajani? I'm sorry.
Yes, absolutely. I just, I've heard that criticism sometimes of stories, and I'm like, that's not what that author intended to do. So they didn't do it.
Right. Yeah. Anybody want to add anything more? Okay, because we are going to move on to the next stage, which is some quick book recommendations for recent and new books that are coming out that you will all want on your shelves. So many of you know Tana Lai because she won a National Book Award for Inside Out and has had a number of titles since then. And so her new book is 100 Years of Happiness, which sounds like something I really need. And it's already garnered starred reviews. It's her picture book debut with illustrations by Fang Yun Kang and Hyun, oh, I'm sorry, I can't read the illustrator's name, Hyun Kim Lien. Okay. And it's a grandchild and grandmother story, which is something very dear to my heart these days. Okay, then we also have Punky Aloha, and I do want to say something here about PI representation. It's a tough thing. Okay, their history is completely different from AA, so it's kind of weird that they're lumped together in a way. And most of the AAPI panels that I participate on have no PI representation. So this is something that I definitely think we need to work on. And this book is an example of a start, Punky Aloha by Shar Tuiasoa. And it's a picture book that is both written and illustrated. Punky is a lot of things, but brave is not one of them until her grandmother lends her a magical pair of sunglasses. So, okay, so you can see the sunglasses on the cover. Be loving, be helpful, be brave. I have a granddaughter who is crazy about sunglasses. I can't wait to get her this book. Okay, the next title we have is A Duet for Home. I don't know about you, but I am a huge Vanderbeekers fan. And Karina Jan Glaser has made that family in a few short years into a classic of children's literature. And this is a standalone. Okay, so to see what she does with when she's out of Vanderbeekers territory. It's about sixth grader June, whose family has lost her home and they're moving into a shelter. She's heartbroken that she will not be able to keep her viola, which is her most prized possession. And then she meets Terrell, who has been living at that shelter for 3 years. And she learns from Terrell how to survive and thrive in her new difficult circumstances. So A Duet for Home by Karina Jan Glaser. Okay, we can't do this panel without mention of Ellen O, who was one of the founders of We Need Diverse Books and is a pole star for so many of us, including myself. She calls me big sister, but I learn much more from her than she ever learns from me. So this is her 2022 APALA Children's Literature Honor book, Finding Junie Kim. Again, a girl who confronts racism and overcomes her, not the racism, of course, we've talked about that, but figures out how she can respond to it with help from her grandfather's story of growing up in Korea during a war. Okay, so getting some of that history that we've been talking about, that so many of the problems really that we face today in society is from the fact that our education system does not teach history as the full truth that we so need if we're going to figure out how to solve problems. Okay, here's Messy Roots by Laura Gao, which I cannot wait to read. I have not read it yet, but I heard about it on the internet way before the book came out. So it's Asian American and it's queer and it's about a girl from Wuhan, which is now famous as purportedly being the source of the coronavirus, the original coronavirus pandemic. You know, that was the source of it. And what happened to her when Wuhan went from being someplace that nobody had ever heard of to being famous for the worst possible reason, right? Not just locally, but worldwide. And, the hatred and the ignorance that people from Wuhan, around Wuhan, and by extension, lots of us who are Asian or look South Asian and, Southeast Asian and East Asian, what we've been facing as a result of this incredible pandemic that we're all going through. Okay, and finally, from Tracy Chi, who also had an AAPI Youth Literature Honor for this book, We Are Not Free. And this is a story of 14 Japanese American teens who lived in internment camps during World War II. Their stories are interconnected. And I know that often, well, lots of us, but young people love that when one character's story overlaps with another. So Tracy has done that this year with 14 different characters, which I'm agog with admiration because my max is 2. I'll do 2 points of view and no more. This is a really, really important book that once again goes to the history of our country that often gets sort of glossed over. Right. So we also have a whole bunch more recommendations, which you can find again in the slides, picture books and middle grade, some older and classic titles and some new ones. So these slides are again available in your registration email that you received. And there are other resources in the educator guide. Okay, so I want to get back to our panel one more time. A couple of different, one more question for you all. Before I go to that, I just want to thank those of you who are in attendance, either live or listening to the recording. I'm sure I speak for all of us. I know it's true for myself and my own books. My books reach young readers through you. I'm not writing Captain Underpants, where the kids go into the store and want that book themselves. My books get to young readers because a teacher, a librarian, a bookseller, an educator, an administrator, a caring parent puts that book in their hands. So the work that you do gives my work meaning. A book is just a chunk of paper until a kid opens it up, right? And you are the ones who make that happen. So I can never thank librarians, teachers, educators enough for making the work that I do have meaning. And that is true for all of us. And it's especially true for those of us who are trying to make noise from communities that have traditionally not had the opportunity to have their voices heard enough. So I really do thank all of you from the bottom of my heart. Okay, so I guess we're going to go backwards this time alphabetically and start with Cece. And let me ask the same question of all of you, which is, what are you working on now that our audience can look forward to in the future?
I am working on another young adult book. And I'm pitching it as The Farewell meets Amy and Roger's Epic Detour for people who don't know that, but it's basically like a road trip book. So, but it's sort of like it's it's still featuring Chinese American characters, and it's about this girl's figuring out how to talk about secrets within her own family, especially things that are really hard to talk about, like the death of a sibling, and things that in Asian families traditionally people don't like to talk about, and how to express yourselves and find a way to connect with your parents in that particular way. And so I'm very excited about it, and I've also always wanted to write a road trip book, so I'm pumped.
Okay, wonderful. Rajani?
So my next middle grade is coming in winter 23. It is another novel in verse. It's dual POV, and it's about identical twin sisters who are musical, but one of them is hiding a secret. And in order to help her sister, her twin changes everything about herself, like what she looks like and the kind of music she plays. But instead of bringing them closer together, it pushes them apart. And then there's a whole camp interlude in which they pretend to be each other and have to play each other's music. So it's called Mirror to Mirror. It's coming next year, and I'm so excited for it.
Great. So ERIN?
So last year I released Maybe Marisol Rainey for early elementary readers, which I also illustrated. And in August, the companion to this comes out, Shirley, Marisol Rady. The ARCs are available. So I'm working on the final, art corrections and final pass pages for Shirley, Marisol Rady. So that will be out in August. So look for that.
I think it should be illegal that people can both write and illustrate. You should have to pick one. It's not fair. But,
Well, if it makes you feel any better, Linda Sue, I feel like I only have moderate illustrative talent.
oh no, I've seen them. I've seen the books. It's wonderful. Joanna.
My next book is my novel. It'll be out on June 14th. So The Silence That Binds Us. I'm excited for that. It's my debut young adult. And then after that, I have a few picture books out next year. The next one is called One Day, and it's a mother it's like her ode to her newborn son with some anti-toxic masculinity vibes.
Well, that sounds wonderful.
Joanne, I have to tell you really quickly, I had a school visit on Monday, and afterwards I got in the back of the bookseller's car because she was going to bring me back to the hotel, and The Silence That Binds Us was in her back seat in art. And I said, I've been wanting to read that. And she said, well, I just finished it. It's wonderful. You can have it. So now I have a copy.
Oh, that makes me so happy.
I was really excited. Anyway, just want to tell you that.
I really need that newborn son book. I just gave birth a month ago.
Oh my goodness.
Boy, so I'm very excited for that picture book now.
Like this is the point at which like the panel becomes a love fest between all the authors, because I'm like, oh, I have all your books right next to my bed too.
Yeah, but a month ago, I cannot believe that Cece is here and how she looks. Oh my gosh, a month after.
This is the first time I put on makeup, you guys. So
okay, I'm going to get to answer this question too, sort of, which is that I have a really, really exciting project that is still a secret, but I'm hoping that the announcement will be made in the next, I don't know, maybe month or so. So I'm going to ask you all to look out for it. And it's something that I'm very, very excited about. And I can't wait to be able to say more than that about it. So, okay, I think we are either out of time or over time. So I'm going to pass it back to our wonderful hosts with great thanks for putting this together, to Harper and to School Library, is it Booklist? Sorry, because this was, for me, this was just a wonderful opportunity. And thank you to all the panelists for your enthusiasm and your passion and your honesty during this panel.
Oh my goodness, that was so wonderful. Thanks to each and every one of you. I'll just reiterate that, and specifically thank you to Linda Sue, ERIN, RAJANI, JOANNA, and Cece. Tomorrow, all attendees will receive an email containing links to today's slide presentation, title list, educator guide, downloadable poster, certificate of completion, and video recording. For more about Booklist webinars, be sure to visit booklistonline.com/webinars, where you can view archives of past webinars and register for upcoming ones, like those you see here. Not yet a subscriber? Pair the print reading experience with the convenience of online access at booklistonline.com and lock in print, online, digital, and archive access by taking advantage of the special webinar offer to get Booklist for only $75. Patron-friendly, librarian-approved, and free with a Booklist subscription, Booklist Reader, Booklist's new digital-only magazine, highlighting diverse readers' advisory recommendations for all ages, has arrived. To see and share the latest issue, visit booklistonline.com/reader-issues. And we are very excited to share that Booklist, Booklinks, and Booklist Reader recently joined the Overdrive Magazine's program in partnership with Zinio and are available for your patrons to read in Libby. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. One more huge thank you to our panelists and to our sponsor, HarperCollins Children's Books. This concludes today's webinar. See you next time.